We gotta be careful. We took the H gate off.
Yeah. I don't think we do, but all right, we live. All right, we live, folks. So, okay, so this week, welcome, by the way, everybody, to Make Something Wonderful, the podcast talking about all things making, or a decent amount of things making. To mute my own volume here.
Tangential to making.
Yeah, tangential to making. That is a good word. Thank you for the vocabulary tonight, Matt. Anyways, we are coming to you live from I3 Detroit, at least in spirit, located at 14D1 Wordsworth Street in lovely Ferndale, Michigan. And we have a bit of an off-script week this week. We'd like to bring back Nate, one of our more or less zone coordinators, and one of the founding members, to talk a bit of a technical passion of his, of BBS, as well as and give. I'm going to step aside more tonight and ask more inquisitive questions than direct conversation. And we also have with us this evening, though he is still sorting out his camera and his video and audio feeds, our lovely producer Rob. Now, as you may have all heard me say before, he's the man behind the scenes making everything work for us. He works tremendously hard, or at least he has the gear to make it look easy. So as far as it goes, we're incredibly appreciative of him and the efforts that he puts into producing the show while we get to sit here and talk to one another. So a warm round of applause for Rob, please, everybody. And actually, again, as I said, I'm going to just run introduction here. We can't hear you just yet, Nate. Or Rob.
With my settings, don't worry about it.
All right. Looking a bit Sith behind the curtain there, kind of, and back in glowing holocron red. So,
Live from a volcano.
Yeah, live from his evil volcano in the middle of Michigan, somewhere. The cops can't find him. It's surprise, no heat signature apparently. Marvel of engineering. No, but I'm going to try my best to sit back. So Matt and Nate, if you kind of, when you can, want to introduce kind of the topic, and because from what I understand, and this is from what I understand, which is limited, BBS is kind of the precursor or a cousin to IRC?
That's the first question I was going to have Nate answer.
I would say it's more of a precursor to what we think of as learning. Bulletin board and this is kind of that's a super goofy and short way to explain it. To put you into a little more of the mindset to understand what we're talking about here, I'd like you to imagine that your phone has no signal and your Wi-Fi is down and your cable modem has no connection, and it's one of those days when just nothing is working, and you pick up your phone and you look at it and you're like, what can I even do with this thing? Like, I can look at some photos that I took last week. And you put down your board and you go to your laptop and you're like, oh, let's see, what can I do with this thing? There's like spreadsheets, or maybe
Cool
there's
stuff.
but even, it's like, now imagine that is 365 days a year. That's life before the internet. And so that's the mindset. That's where I want you to mentally be. Say it is 1992, and you've been hanging out with. This is purely hypothetical, by the way. You've been hanging out with some guys at school who are into this computer, what they call bulletin board system, and they say, "Man, you really got to get a modem and start playing with this. It's amazing." And I say, okay, what exactly is a modem? And the one guy goes, well, okay, so it's like a telephone for your computer. It connects to the phone line, and it lets your computer talk to other computers. Okay, so what do you do with that? So it turns out, you've probably seen or possibly played some text adventure games where, like, you've got commands you type, and it's like it gives you a description of the room you're in, and you can say like, you know, get sword, you know, go south, whatever. um, Imagine for a moment that you don't need to be in the same room as the computer running that game. Suppose you could run the game on one computer and then connect to it from somewhere else. And that's kind of okay. So we're starting to put the pieces together. Um, so what happens with a bulletin board is someone has a computer and a phone line because of course everyone has landlines. It's the 90s. um, and they set up their modem on their computer to automatically answer a call that comes in, and other people will call it. Now, publishing your number and getting other people to know to call it is kind of a secondary problem, but so other people will call it, and then you've got some software that's running on your computer that turns it into a board. It's not just, you know, because if you don't, then it's just okay. The two modems are talking, and now it's like you've got a serial cable plugged between your computers. What software do you run? So there's software that turns it into a bulletin board so that when the other modem calls in, they get a login prompt and they can put in their username. And it says, oh, I don't know what that name is. Would you like to create an account? And they do so. And they set up an ID. And now they have a username and a password and they log in. And then there's stuff they can do. There's message areas and file areas and stuff like that. And so it's got what you would think of today as a forum where you've got different topics and messages threads within those topics. It's got individual email where you can send, you know, private messages between, you know, individual users to each other, and it's got files that you can upload. Um, and this is really important. Having files is part of what makes a board popular, because again, imagine no signal. You want some software. Okay, you can't go just get it off the internet. So normally, the process of obtaining software means that you uh, get on your bike or get in your car and you go down to the computer store, you know, a couple miles away, and you look at the shelf and there's boxes of software there, and you choose from what's available. Um, or if you're really lucky, then your computer store is kind of cool, and they also have a rack, like one of those brochure racks that has just a million little tiny cubbies, and
Yeah.
there's just a floppy in each spot. No packaging, no glossy, no manual, no nothing. Just a disc with like a probably an inkjet printed label, um, that says, you know, Bob's spreadsheet package. Okay, that's kind of interesting. Shareware, $10. Floppy disk, $1. Okay, cool. Let me try Bob's spreadsheet. So you hand the guy $1, you take the disk home, you put it in, you install the software, you play with it, and if you find yourself using it, then you write a check for $10 and you mail it to Bob, whose address is in the software. Say thank you for the software. And so this is called shareware. You're encouraged to share the files around, because that's how the software gets distributed. And then if you like it, you register it, you pay for it. And so a board can have a lot of shareware available for download that anyone can call in and say, oh, I've been looking for a spreadsheet or you know, pretty much anything. Oh, here's a piece of software that helps me create, you know, the giant dot matrix printer banners on, you know, fanfold paper that are 10 feet long. That kind of stuff was very popular. And then you can just you download it, you install it, you run it, without having to go to the store. Revolutionary, right? Mind blown.
Yeah.
Um, and this attracts people to a board. So, especially getting into the mid 90s as CD-ROMs became a thing. You know, the CDs had been around since the 80s, and they were always a digital format. It was always, you know, ones and zeros stored on there. It's just those ones and zeros were always encoding audio. But Sony, Toshiba, Philips, JVC, I don't remember who exactly made the CD format, always knew you could put computer data on here. It's just who would need 650 meg of data? That's a preposterous amount of data. But you know, the 90s come along, and it's like, well, that could actually be kind of interesting. If you go out and you collect a whole crap ton of shareware and you put it all onto one CD, and you press that, you press 1,000 copies of it or 10,000 copies, you include it with a magazine or something like that. That magazine's gonna fly off the shelves. And some of the people who buy that magazine to get that CD are going to be bulletin board system operators who are going to invest a serious chunk of change in a CD-ROM drive, pop this disk into it, plug it into their board, and make it so that users can dial up and download any of this fantastic cornucopia of stuff. And it turns out, there came to be thousands and thousands of these collections, most of which had some overlap with each other. And figuring out how much work someone had actually done to put together a new one versus just copy an old one is something for the archaeologists. But but even before that, there's another thing. Piracy, of course. Maybe you don't feel like paying for your software. Maybe you went and got one of those nice big glossy boxes off the shelf at the computer store, and you put the floppies into your computer, and you said, "I'm gonna zip up copies of what's on these floppies and upload it to the board, and then someone else can download it." And there may be copy protection you have to break, yada yada. There's a whole scene that grew up around it. But boards that had pirated software were a different kind of popular with a different kind of crowd. But there's and I think that's the reason a lot of people would start calling into a board, is because it has a good files area. And so if you were like a sysop with little to no skill and you didn't feel like designing, like a bunch of badass like screens and art and menus and animations and stuff, because this was all part of the experience calling it, you could still offer something that the community would find valuable just by having a crap ton of files. And some boards, I knew a couple that did this. When they only had one CD-ROM drive, and of course they didn't have the hard drive space to copy the contents of the CD onto the hard drive. Hard drives at this time were like 100 meg. But they would have several CDs, and so on Monday it would be the Shareware Games CD. And if you wanted games, you would call in on Monday. And on Tuesday, it would be the Clip Art CD. And if you were working on, art projects or something, you'd call in and browse the files then. And yeah, it seems silly now, but let me give you another take the time back. How long does it take to download 1 meg right now?
Fractions of a second.
Yeah. So I was looking for some wallpaper. Okay, I got a new high-res monitor. I need some wallpaper. Click, save, done. Yeah, fraction of a second. My ISP upgraded me to 100 megabit service, so roughly a tenth of a second these days. When I started on BBSs in 92, 93, I was connecting with a 2400 baud modem, which was nice and cheap. There was faster out there, which meant that slow ones were cheap. You know how long it takes to download 1 meg at 2400 baud? Take a guess.
No clue. Well, a day.
An hour.
Oh.
So you're looking at, and if JPEG as we know it today had existed then you could get a nice high-res, wallpaper photo in an hour. But it didn't. We had GIF, or GIF, whichever you want to say, which doesn't have the high, lossy photo compression that JPEG does. And so that same amount of data would actually encode, roughly an eighth of the amount of image. So you'd be looking at a crappy photo would take you about an
hour. So to give people some context, because I think, those who are either just tuning in or have tuned in to Nate's story time going on here, no, not meant deterrently or derogatorily, but this is precursor internet. This is before anything like that. So it's hard for some to understand, like me. I was, by the time I realized that the internet was out there, I was probably 13, 14 years old. I had no concept of this pre-existing history of this technology. So, but what I mean, for something like this to have existed, there must be like some role it serves today still, like other than just an artifact. Is there something that BBS offers us today that we don't get from the modern internet?
Yeah, I miss BBS's quite a bit because there was one thing they did better than the modern internet ever has, and this is kind of an artifact of the fact that the telephone system was so expensive. Um, Again, people today may not remember or be familiar with a thing called long distance. That you pick up your cell phone, you can call California for the same price as calling your neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's just all flat rate. That was extremely not the case. Basically, for whatever reason, cell phones seem to coincide with the dropping of long distance rates to zero. But prior to that, you had a local call, which on most calling plans was free. You could have unlimited local calls, and that was to your zone and the adjacent zones. And I'm going to switch cameras here because I have my down facing camera pointing at my whiteboard here. Let's see if that will do that.
Always have your whiteboard handy.
Ah,
There you go.
the whiteboardy thing. Okay. Let me bring this down just a little bit. That. Cool. Okay. It's mirror. Why did it do that to me? This was right side around last I looked.
Uh
There's no
oh.
setting for that, is there? Well, whatever. You know what? Just pretend the geography doesn't matter, and the doodles will make sense anyway.
Okay.
So I lived in Madison Heights at the time, which is part of the Royal Oak zone. And Royal Oak was a local call from Warren over there. And Royal Oak, let's see, up to the north, Pontiac, and then Detroit had Zone 1, Detroit 2, Detroit 3, Detroit 5, Detroit 4. And then I had some friends over in Roseville. And so, I could call this or this or this or this locally, but I could not call Roseville. Roseville, oh, my camera's, there we go. I could not call Roseville. That was 2 hops away. That was a toll call. Oh, suppose somebody in Roseville wanted to set up a bulletin board. They could have callers from Warren or Detroit Zone 1 or elsewhere in Roseville. And
Okay.
somewhat popular, all right. But if someone in Warren wanted to set up a board, they could get calls from Detroit 2, Detroit 1, Roseville, Royal Oak, Sterling Heights. Um, that would be a very popular board because it was local to a lot of people who couldn't otherwise talk. And so,
Okay.
as it happens, the 2 boards that I spent most of my time on were in Warren. But here's the thing, this meant that everybody on those boards was within 20 minutes of each other. This was not a worldwide phenomenon. Yes, you could send messages worldwide through relay networks, but they took days to arrive and so on. 99% of what went on a board was based on local phone calls, and you were at most 2 hops away. And so you had parties, you had culture, you had local, everyone could know each other. Sometimes you did because, let's face it, the number of people that owned computers was pretty small. It's like if you had a local Maserati drivers club. It's a fairly exclusive group, and it also says something about your personality. So there was this one board I was on. Um, it's called Scimitar, and it ran some very unique software. Most boards only had a single line. It was just the sysop had a desktop in their bedroom with a modem in it. They plugged a phone line into it, and they published the number, which means that line was going to be ringing off the hook. So they turned off the ringer, with the phone attached to it, so the computer would just answer it on its own. Um, and one person could be called in at a time, and they would read an email that had been addressed to them, maybe compose a reply, upload some files they felt like sharing, download some files, maybe play some games that were online, what were called door games, because there was like a gateway from this piece of software to that piece of software. Play some doors and hang up.
Yep.
And now
Okay.
someone else could call. And so if two people were trying to call the board at the same time, one of them was on and the other was getting a busy signal.
Okay.
So, and this also meant that most of us had a couple of boards we'd frequent because, if the one I wanted to call was busy, there'd be another one that had, kind of my second choice. But uh, certain BBS software could support multi-line operation. So if you have several serial ports on your computer, you plug several modems into them, you connect several phone lines, and now several people can be called in at once. And they can do all the same stuff. There's email, there's files areas, and so on. But on a multi-line board, no one uses email. No one uses the files area because all they're doing is chatting.
Yeah.
Like that is the number one, and it wasn't called chat; it was called CV Simulator. Because that and it had like 20 numbered channels that you could choose from, and it was just kind of it was understood that channel 1 was general chat, channel 2 was like adulty naughty stuff, and channel 3 and up were for whatever you wanted to do. um, and and so this Scimitar had 6 lines, um, and it was incredibly popular because it was in Warren, and it meant that I could call in from here, and my friend, because I used to live over in East Detroit, which was part of the Roseville phone, could call in and we could chat for free. Neither of us is paying long distance. This is all free local calls. Whereas if we wanted to spend 10 minutes on the phone with each other just shooting the breeze, that would probably be a $4 call.
Okay.
So that was an incredibly compelling use case. And I found out only very recently that the Scimitar was the board, I'm sorry, Excelsior was the software. Excelsior was developed here in Michigan. That actually one of the other boards, which was up in Pontiac, was one of the test sites. I think it may have actually been run by the developers. There was a board in Fairport, Michigan BBS. And so there were a couple of these boards. Oh yeah, it was for the Amiga, by the way. So these were Amiga for running these boards. Um, there were. It also had the ability to link systems, and so there was another Excelsior board in Roseville called Industry, and Scimitar and Industry would just call each other and stay on the phone 24/7 with one line. And so Scimitar's other 5 lines and Industry's other 7 lines could be used by regular users, and we could all chat together in this giant system.
Wow.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
It makes me appreciate. I mean, it blows my mind because now like I'm seeing the interconnectedness and how this all works out, and it makes a lot more modern stuff make sense and makes me appreciate it a lot more. But where was I going with this? Those those 12 people, think about this in a modern context, those 12 people talking was a feat of technology back then. And now we have hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands in something like a Twitch chat, a YouTube chat, a Discord group. And so now, and the other question or effect that I kind of have here is with a local community now built around the BBS, you have the removal of was it anonymity or anonymity? I can't talk well. Brain fried from the week.
Everybody's name. You know their caller ID.
Yeah.
And it's not like someone in uh, Nigeria can just send you 10 billion emails for free. That would be extremely expensive. So there is no spam because it would be expensive to do. There is
Mhm.
no foreign interference or anything because it would be expensive to do. The only thing that's free is this hyper local stuff. And so it's yeah, there was a community to it, and kind of a lack. There were still people fucking around. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
There were people. Um, I actually just the other day I was watching someone else's podcast where they were talking about the late '80s BBS scene in Texas, and that's kind of what spurred me to offer this topic for here today. And they were talking about how the one guy wanted to mess with another guy, so he made a login that sounded like a girl, and then like chatted with her, and then like posted the logs and embarrassed the guy, and then
So
people,
trolls have existed for eternities.
but they knew who the guy was,
Yeah.
and they just banned him, and they're like, bye, don't ever call again, you're not cool. And that was that. The really got me though was the parties, so I'm like, at this time I'm like 13, 14.
Yep.
No, probably, yeah, 14. um and I have never fit in with anyone, because who I've always been around is other kids my age,
Mm-hmm.
who, if you end up in like the most hyper nerdy places in the world, you would end up with a couple of other kids like me, and we would jive, and it was cool. But then we'd have to go home, or whatever. And suddenly here I am in a community of other people like me of all ages. That's no longer a selecting factor. We're not brought together by being in the same classroom. We're brought together by dialing into the same board, and we're self-selecting by interest and by technical aptitude. And so suddenly here's my milieu, here's the people that I can talk with forever about anything and everything. And I'm intensely, like not just addicted to the social side of it, but I'm kind of discovering like who I am, that I can talk to people, that I don't always have to be the outsider. Maybe these are a bunch of other outsiders, or maybe we're just each other's people. And so, and it was a disproportionately young group, most folks in their 20s, I would say. But not everybody. Doesn't matter, if you find this technology cool, you can use it. And so, but like 20 somethings are often want to do, let's throw parties.
Yeah.
And so there's this couple who also had a very large house in Central Warren, named Scott and Amy. And there's a very small chance of Scott maybe actually listening tonight. Uh, and they, because I know he's still around, and they would throw parties. And I wasn't not allowed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to laugh at that, but I'm imagining, I now imagine you in my own shoes when I came to I3, to my first introduction being the Maker Faire party, and me feeling horribly out of place for just a tad, and then realizing, wait, these people are like me.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yes. Suddenly it's your people.
yeah.
And so I'm okay. I think by party time I was probably 15. Um, and there's like, it's mostly a bunch of 20 somethings, and there's a whole lot of beer and some other stuff, and who knows what's going on in the upstairs bedrooms.
It's mostly
Um,
a bunch of 20
but
something.
that didn't matter
There's
because
a whole lot of beer.
I want to. And
Hey guys.
Hey, oh, sorry, Nate. Sorry to interrupt story time real quick. Ladies and gentlemen, the long-awaited Rob, our producer. So
Welcome.
he's briefly fixing his audio, I believe, and he's joining us. And we'll
Can you hear me?
yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, cool.
So thank you for finally stepping out from behind the camera, man. Like, you did, say hello to the people at home.
Hello.
All right.
Nate, you want
So-
to pick up there, or Rob? Do you have anything to
Yes,
add
sorry
before
to
we get
interrupt, Nate.
started? Nope.
I am
Continue.
trying to see if I can mess with the brightness settings on my. Oh no, it says it's maxed. Okay, weird. What if I do that? All right, whatever. I'm just not going to use that camera. Whatever. Rob, how much of that did you hear?
Oh, I heard all of it.
What was your experience like? Was it anything like that?
Well, I guess I was kind of tuning it out a little bit as I figured things out. My experience with the BBS scene.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I guess what age were you when that was a thing? Let's start with that.
I was probably like 11 or so, like just like around 6th or 7th grade, and some friends, older brothers, were into it, and it was just like hey, check out this crazy thing. You can use your modem to dial into this place, and there's like games and information that your parents probably don't want you to know about, and
You
yeah.
weren't in Detroit at the time, right? You were somewhere else geographically, I believe.
Oh, I
right?
grew up in the area around here.
Oh, you did. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. Cool.
Oh man, information. That's another thing that I didn't mention. You know, when I talked about like the files area and stuff like that, we all think of software, but there were also text files, just documents, um, and there was all sorts of a lot of what was called phreaking, which I don't know if people even know that term anymore. It was telephone hacking, spelled with a PH. You
I
know,
think it
it's
means
like
something else today.
well, yeah, but like you know the kind of low end would be like how to get free long distance calls because of course long distance was a big driving factor in a lot of things, but there was a lot of just the telephone network was bigger than anything, in a world without what we know as the modern internet. If you wanted to play with a computer larger and more sophisticated than you had ever seen, you went to play with the telephone network. To do your bidding. Can you, can you route a call in an interesting way, or place calls to numbers that can't normally receive calls, or there's stuff, um, and there's people would write this down and pass around this information in these text files, and that was another thing that some boards would specialize in. And so you'll see there's another thing. And so everything was text mode screen. So, but you had colors. You could use the American National Standards Institute had a standard set of commands that like terminals could use, like a terminal that calls into a mainframe or something like that, to draw characters and move the cursor on screen and set colors and all that sort of stuff. And so you could write in this ANSI command language, you could write a screen that was this fantastic piece of art. And these ANSI art files got passed around as well. And so one of the things that you would do if you wanted people to call your board is you would create, some colorful, badass looking, whatever piece of art, or however many hours that you could call them, because, the rest of the day it's like our fax line or whatever. Most serious boards were 24-hour, but you never know. And you'd put all this information into one of these. It was like a glossy flyer that you would hand out, but it was a file that you would then upload to a bunch of other boards, and hope that people would see it, and hope the sysop of those boards didn't say, "Well, screw you, buddy, you're not poaching my users."
So first off, I have to say, someone in YouTube chat saying they know you named BSD. I don't know if those initials ring a bell for you. So I have no idea. He's saying you two go way back, and
Way,
there's
way.
yeah. Yeah, and so there's that. The other question I've had for just a while with all of these stories is how the hell are the system operators paying for the phone bill for these things? Because it seems like it would rack up a massive charge, no?
You don't pay for incoming calls.
Oh, the users are paying. Okay,
Oh,
okay,
if it's a local call, if it's from Royal Oak to Royal Oak, it's local, it's free under the standard calling plan. Almost everyone um, had I forget what it was called. It was like local 400 super or something like that, and that meant that you could have like 400 local calls that were free, and beyond that, it was like a penny a call as long as they were local. But then toll calls were the regular rate, and long distance calls were the regular rate. Um, but nobody's going to blow through 400 calls in a month, and very few of us actually did because most of the calls were longer. And that was just, that was Michigan Bell's way of saying you can use this for regular stuff, but don't be a telemarketer, basically. Um, and so that was the standard plan everybody had. The local calls were free, and so it was this geographical map that zones were local to each other, that it was all free as long as you weren't calling too far away, and that's what made BBSs popular. So there's one more thing that you may. I'm gonna flip back to the camera with the zone map for a second here.
yeah,
Um, and I apologize again about it being mirrored. I don't know how to tell.
no, that's all right.
Okay. So if there's a board in Warren and I'm in Royal Oak and there's a board in Pontiac, they can't call each other. They're not local.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say there's another board in Royal Oak that is. And let's say somebody in Roseville calls the board in Warren, writes an email, and addresses it to someone in Pontiac. Then the board in Warren calls the board in Royal Oak and transfers that email, hands it off. It's a local,
Okay.
still free. And then
Yep.
as soon as this one drops that call, hey, the line is free. Now we pick it up and dial a call to the board in Pontiac and deliver that message. And it's been all local calls, even though from here to here it would have been long distance.
Okay.
So you had these
Switching.
message passing networks, and there's one of them still around called FidoNet. There were a couple of them, but FidoNet's the only one anyone ever talks about because it was the biggest. And so it was this set of protocols where you didn't just have a username on the local board. Your board also had kind of what was called a like a region and a point code or something like that. I don't remember exactly how they were called, but basically, I could write an email to Robert at 21/16.2 and send it. And I'm on, myself at 21/16.7. And so the FidoNet network routing would understand, okay, the destination is over here and it needs to go through this port on the way. And so there was what was called mail hour, was I believe between 2, 3, or between 3 and 4 a.m. When boards typically stopped accepting incoming calls from users, and they would just call each other, and they would toss these mail bundles back and forth, and so if you were local calls, then it didn't matter. But the reason they did it at night is that long distance got cheaper at night. There was a peak on off-peak rate. And so
Ah.
you had some sysops who would say, you know what, it's my hobby. I'm going to throw some disposable income at it, and uh, my board here in Michigan is going to call Chicago every night, and
Ah.
just a couple of people making long hops like that, messages can get across the country in a couple of days. Um, Whereas if it was pure local calls, it would take weeks of, what the hell? Play some, email chess or whatever. But the locality was everything in these. I think that's what I miss most about the modern internet. It's kind of like you look at Craigslist. Craigslist has like 1% of that local feel because it is, it's like, okay, so there's Detroit.Craigslist, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that's, the Tri County area. It's huge. There's way too much spam there. And there is no Brighton.Craigslist. There's Lansing, but there's nothing in between. And so if you're in between, you don't really fit into any Craigslist. Whereas on BBS's, there's, probably a handful, maybe a dozen or more in every local zone. And so everyone has its hyper local radius of callers. So if you're in Brighton and you don't fit clearly into Detroit or Lansing, whatever, you've got Brighton, Howell, Pinckney, a couple of other the local zones that can call you. And so every board automatically gets its local radius worth of users. And it's just purpose built for having parties and getting together and swapping floppies around because it's faster than modems or whatever.
So the in between boonies is now all of a sudden the popular kid, more or less.
Yes.
Ah.
Yes, because it's like if you're someone whose parents work and uh, you have the house to yourself in the evening and you can have friends over, you are definitely more popular than your friends whose parents are home in the evening.
Ah.
Like that, you're in an advantageous position where you can host stuff that's in demand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so being in the boonies, if there was nothing interesting within like one local call either side of you, okay, that doesn't matter. But chances are there was, or you could set up a chain where you were just 4 or 5 local call hops between a couple of population centers or something, and then yeah, it'd be very popular. That other podcast I was referencing earlier about East Texas, or not East, I don't know, Odessa, Texas. Um, Odessa had like a west and an east zone. I think of it as a fairly small town, but apparently West Odessa couldn't call Midland, the the adjacent city, but East Odessa was a local call from Midland. And so the one guy lived in West Odessa, and his buddy lived in East Odessa. And he was like, "Hey, can I put a computer at your house? Can I buy you a phone line?" And
Mm.
and so they did, and they set up this board in East Odessa, which the Midland kids could call, and the West Odessa kids could call, and the East Odessa kids could call, and it was very popular because it was in the right place.
Got you.
So,
Location, location, location.
absolutely.
All right.
So
So and all of this. I mean, I'm trying to figure a way to tie it all back together, and it keeps coming back to almost degrees of separation and community.
Mhm.
Like that. It all weaves back to that. So.
Oh yeah, and the sysops all knew each other too. Not everybody knew everybody, but chances are, if and there were a couple popular like software packages that your board could run. I talked a lot about Excelsior because it was like the fancy multi-line package that powered the boards that I was most obsessed with. But that was actually a very rare, very uncommon. Like if you look at the modern BBS revival websites and stuff like that, they don't even mention Excelsior. It doesn't exist as far as history is concerned. That's how like unique it was around here. But there were some really popular. Renegade was kind of the free one that I was most fond of, which was a derivative of Teleguard, which was kind of old and busted as far as I was concerned. But there's people who beat my ass for saying that. And then there was Tag, and then there was like Major, which was commercial. You'd have to pay a lot for a license, but it had multi-line support and some other real cool stuff. And there was Pro Board and PC Board. There was all these different software packages. But chances are that a sysop in one city running tag knew the sysop of a board in another city also running tag because they could share tips and tricks. Hey, I figured out how to get, Trade Wars or one of the other games working on my board properly, even though it's not supported. And they pass these things around. And so there was kind of this second level of technical connection between the sysops. And I, as someone who liked the technical side of computers, I was never much of a programmer. I dabbled around in BASIC and stuff, but I loved utilities. There were all these little, kind of the stuff that Linux is made of is like all these little building blocks that you can stitch together to make larger functions. In DOS, it didn't come with a whole lot of that, and so people wrote their own, and so I collected these things. Whether it was I downloaded a couple from a board here, or here was one in the back of PC Magazine that you would type in. I just collected hundreds of these things, and so there was this one board. I'm going to tell a little bit of a story here. There's this one board that I called in since I can tell this story. Um, it was for everything pirated you could imagine. And oh, I should also mention modem speeds. We talked a little bit about earlier. I started off at 2400 because it was cheap, and as soon as I could mow enough lawns to afford it, I upgraded to a 14.4. 6 times faster. Still not the fastest available. Those were very expensive, but 14.4 had gotten affordable because there were boards that wouldn't let you call in at 2400. They would, like, if you did manage to connect, they would hang up on you immediately because you were going to waste their line time. And so the various wares boards and stuff were intensely concerned with moving a lot of data quickly. They always invested in the fastest modems, and they eliminated, blocked out the slowest. So at 14.4, I was like the slowest thing allowed on DVD, and I didn't really know what I was getting into. I was probably a fool and probably put my real name into the sign up form. Because I was so innocent, like it hadn't occurred to me that it's like, you don't tell anyone who you are when you're doing this. But I wasn't doing this. I was just calling it in because somebody gave me the number and said I might find it interesting. So DVD was one of the few boards where when you first called in, you had no access at all. Like, there were different access levels, like privilege levels that you could have. But this one, the only option that existed in the menu was upload a file. You had to prove yourself. You had to offer something that SysOp didn't already have. And the fancier a board it was, the harder that was. And so I didn't really know what I could offer, but it occurred to me, all right, hang on. So I popped into another window. I had a multitasker called Desk View, which lets you run like multiple DOS windows at a time. This is before Microsoft Windows. And I zipped up my utilities directory. And I uploaded this zip file. And there's another thing I should mention is that your modem can only do one thing at a time in this era. Right now on the internet, you've got packets where there's, my voice packet and my video packet are flying from me to Discord, but at the same time, I open up a web browser and my web request packet goes to Google, and then the response comes back, and all this stuff is happening over the same modem at the same time. That's not the way BBSs ran. It was a single session. Um, and so it's like you're just the only thing coming across the board right now is the text that paints the menu on screen that you choose what to do. And the character that goes back is you press F to go to the files area. And now another menu shows up and says, and so it's got the like header and time and all that sort of stuff. And you press U for upload. And there were a couple of experiments that were just starting to break this habit, where you could be transferring a file in the background while also doing something else. And there was this protocol called HS-Link, which was one of these. And DVD supported it, of course, because they were badass. And I had it because I thought it was cool. And so I start using HS-Link to upload my utilities package. I just zipped up my whole pile of crap and I'm uploading it. And out of curiosity, I hit the chat button. And, calling this up if he's in his bedroom. And sure enough, he is. because the computer's right there. And he wheels over and he's like, "Yo, what's up?" And he can see that I'm a new user, and so on and so forth. And I said, "Hey, I'm new here. I don't have a lot of wares to upload, but what I'm giving you here is my package of like batch file utilities, all this stuff that I find useful for automation and doing math and like error checking and all sorts of things like that. I think you as a sysop would really find a lot of this stuff useful." He says, "Cool, sounds neat. I'll check it out and let you know, and call back tomorrow." And right around that time, the transfer finishes. Bam, hang up. He didn't even back me out into the menus. It was just gone, like no carrier. Click. Okay. So I call back tomorrow, and I log in. I have email. It's from Sysop, and it says, "Dude, this stuff is badass. I've already revamped like half of my operations. Enjoy the access." So I exit the email, I go over into the files area, and I have 200 meg of download credit, which is like,
That's huge.
yeah, that's like a dragon hoard of gold worth of riches.
And yeah, in that
Because
era, yeah, holy.
I just impressed the sysop, and I'm like, "Oh shit, yeah, okay." So I'm like, I'm done. I have a new version of Desk UX and like After Dark screensavers because that was like a hot commodity that everyone liked to trade, and all sorts of stuff. I didn't abuse it. Yeah, I was like, I got a couple things that I really wanted that I knew I couldn't get anywhere else, and then hung up. I didn't call much after that. But fast forward to 1996. It is now the internet has become a thing. Like Windows 95. Like really built the internet into the operating system, made it so easy anyone could do it. And so BBSs are basically gone by 95. There's a couple straggling around, but nobody calls them. Most folks are on the internet still with dial-up, unless you're at university, where they have like this crazy fast wired connection in the dormitories because they've like strung network cable, because university have like mainframes and mini computers and terminals and all this stuff all over. And so, what the hell, let's wire the dorms. And so they were running this stuff. I was kind of a token ring guy at the time. I kind of looked down my nose at the non-deterministic nature of Ethernet, but I had to acknowledge that it was very, very cheap. And so they had Ethernet running through the dorms at a blazing 10 megabits, and they really didn't care what you did with it. So I happened to be on campus at UMich. Um, Me and a buddy from high school have headed out to Ann Arbor because we're going to go to the 2600 meeting. 2600 is this hacker magazine, and they have, again, very local meetings. So you turn to the back page of the magazine, and there's like listings of, if you're in New York, then the meeting is in this particular subway station by the payphones. If you're in Baltimore, then the meeting is here by the payphones. And so if you're in Michigan, the meeting is Ann Arbor, the Galleria on South University, 1214, by the payphones. Because a lot of payphones could receive incoming calls, and it was kind of funny that you could like call from one meeting to another and like talk to the people at these other hacker meetings. So I'm in Ann Arbor waiting for we get there early. The meeting doesn't start until like another hour. So me and my buddy Jeff have made the drive, borrowed my mom's car. And we swing by the dorms to visit his buddy, who's, a year older in college now. And Jeff's buddy is, the two of them are talking. I'm the third wheel. I'm just kind of chilling on the couch in the dorm room, like flipping through magazines or whatever. And I hear the two of them talking. And college guy says to Jeff, "Oh, dude, I got to give you a login on my FTP. I got tons of shit." And he says, "Yeah? What's the address?" And he says, dbd.reshall.umich.edu. And my ears perk up. I'm like, "Excuse me, I don't mean to eavesdrop, but did you say DBD?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Does that stand for death before dishonor?" He says, "Who are you?"
It was the sysop, wasn't it?
It was the sysop. I don't know if you'd remember me. My username was myself, but you might remember what I uploaded, which is a pack of batch file utilities. And he goes, "Fuck, that was you? I'm making you a login on my FTP."
So
Small world.
this all comes back to something. There is, and I have to thank those who have been watching regularly out in the audience, because there is a couple people that have been tuning in, either my coworkers or some friends from Discord, and even these kids that I'm mentoring, and they're tuning in, they're listening to these stories or us interview these tradespeople. The whole purpose of why we're doing this, and I don't know if I got into it last time, is to foster a sense of community. And like, that is kind of the perfect kind of end cap to sit. Like, I know we've had more of a reflective episode. We haven't had more of a discussion going on, and that's okay this week. Like, there's been a lot going on, and this week that's completely all right. And that's why we were a little all over the map and figuring things out. But either way, I think that we need something like that for makerspaces, and we have the internet, but we don't have the intent, kind of deal. And so this show was supposed to serve that very purpose of being one of these BBS systems where other makerspaces, like the ones in Las Vegas, like Syn Shop, who we always plug, who is live now as far as it goes, and all that, this is what that's supposed to be for everybody else. So and Rob, I want to have you in on an episode where you're more talkative, bud, because I appreciate just seeing you on the screen.
Yeah.
I'm dead freaking serious. I feel really bad now because we go the whole episode, you call halfway in, no blame on you. You call halfway in, and then you're sitting there listening to Nate's story, and I'm like, man, this is Rob's debut episode. This is, dude, we got to get him talking about his own stuff, because some of the stuff he does, I want to do a curtain pullback episode where we talk about all the gear and work that goes, like, next week, maybe even, if you're up for it. But as far as it goes, like, that was the purpose. I explained to somebody, he's like, "Hey, Thomas, what are you trying to do this show for? Like, I like what you're doing. I like you got different people on every week, but what's the whole point?" I said,
What's the point of anything?
yeah. But I told him, we see creators like Zyla Foxlin, like Adam Savage, like Alex Steele, the Samurai Carpenter, all these maker celebrities on YouTube, and they seem like every man an island type of deal. And yeah, they have the internet, and yeah, they have this and they have that, but they don't realize, they don't back away for the big picture for a second and realize that they're a single pixel in a larger maker community. Yes, Jan, absolutely. I just saw that comment across the YouTube channel. She said Wizard of Oz episode with Rob. Absolutely, that's the intent. But the intent here, Nate, and having you on, like, at first, the BBS story is like, story time with Nate makes for a great week off for Thomas and Matt. That's exactly what we need right now. And as far as it goes, like, the BBS story capstones the conversation I was having this afternoon about the show with somebody. Is that people are, I want other makerspaces to realize and to come sit with us on the show, not so that we're dragging on your coattails for the clout, but because there's a larger community that needs acknowledgement, because once a year at NomCon isn't enough. And what we're losing in this wash of I'm not going to say globalization is a bad thing, but what we're losing in this wash of noise that is the internet is this sense of community, and that needs to come back. And i3 is positioned to do that, in that we're 10 years old. We're now the cool older brother makerspace where we can be like, yo, guys, come talk to our members. Come start this conversation. Come to the table and sit with us and talk about where the maker community is going and what we want to do as far as it goes going forward, because we can let these maker celebrities and influencers right the path, but some of them may misstep. And that they're human. That will happen. So we as a community should speak up and have an identity aside from these people that we're lifting up to be exactly that. So, and we need more of a voice and more of a sense that we're not alone as far as it goes. So, but yeah. So, oh, what's up? You like cut out, Matt.
So thank you for joining us, Nate. And Robert, hopefully we can hear some more of your story in one of our future episodes here.
Yeah, I resonated with some of the things that Nate was saying. I didn't want to interrupt, and my experience with that scene was kind of on the tail end of its existence.
I missed it.
So
I apologize for monopolizing the whole time. I lost track of time. I didn't realize we're only doing an hour. So
we have other members, Nate, who have messaged me and gone, story time with Nate is something I want to watch. So like people ask for, they're like, hey, story time with Nate, story time with Nate, they're like, you know, yeah, imagine David Henry as a 5-year-old sitting there going, story time, story time, story time. Like, you know, but Rob, would it be a crazy idea to ask you to do next week for a show behind the scenes episode kind of thing?
Ooh, maybe. All
right.
We could do something like that.
Yeah, I'd be up for that. I'd do a walk around of the basement studio too. Like as far as here, I mean, there's nothing really to see, but yeah, like a behind, like next week, let's just do a behind the scenes as far as it goes, because it's easy. It writes itself. We can just sit there and riff and show people what goes into making the show and what we do every week. So, and good. Even pre-show rituals like my Crazy Muppets theme thing. So, yeah.
Or it starts every time.
Yeah. So a couple other things. I want to again express appreciation before we end here and wrap everything up. I want to express appreciation for the community out there, for those people who are tuning in every week, either to the live or watch it, because I see the live count or the watch count tick up over the week. We normally hit about 35 to 60 views. We hit 100 on episode 9 or 10, I want to say, and that was like fantastic. But the people who consistently tune in, thank you very much, Rob, for always running the show and being our frigging rock. You're not going to be held to it for much longer after we open up, bud. You're going to have a lot more help behind the cameras and setting up shots and doing programming. Like you're not going to be the only one anymore. I promise you. I will make it out Friday night.
I'm starting to document my processes to show everybody.
Yes, that's exactly what you need to do, because we ought to. And there's been Jan. Jan has offered to find people to talk in Slack. She's offered to promote it. She's been on the show. And like even my friends are like, who is this Jan? Like they're starting to wonder about. So like the I3 community is bleeding into my coworkers and bleeding into my friend group. So I'm like, this is fantastic. People finally get it and what I'm doing. I'm not crazy. It's validation. So yeah. I will say, guys, I appreciate all of you. Go check out Syn Shop. We had them on last week. Go check out that episode with them. Like and subscribe. We're trying to get a guy. I know that's a YouTube preacher moment. Like and subscribe. Hallelujah. But either way, we're trying to get the custom URL. We're trying to merge the old channel into this one. So and yeah, have a wonderful week, everybody. Go out there and keep making and keep everything in mind with the sense of community, and that's what really matters right now more than anything else. And that's what we need in the maker zone and in maker spaces and everywhere else. Anything you can think of, apply kindness and community to it. So, and thank you, Nate, for coming out and enchanting us with story time again. So
anytime.
All right. So Rob, you are free to play us off. Yes, be excellent to each other, folks. Yeah. All right.
Woo! Oh, so you can tell us when we're off air.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's exciting, like the mystery when we go off air. It's the mystery when we go on air and what the very random first words are going to be that get broadcast.
Yeah. So, I think that's actually the charm of the show. All right.
Bye, guys.
Adios.